Welcome back. This is Ramon, bold like a leopard. I'm going to talk to you today about a topic commonly associated misleadingly with the right wing, which is the anti-Semitism or the hatred of Jews or whatever. Well, if you look at the majority of white right-wing groups, they don't really have much to do with the Jews or Israel or anything, or in some cases they're actually pretty uh, pretty supportive of Israel for some reason, often because of evangelical Christianity. And usually, what they'll try to do is say that they believe in some sort of Christianity that is, uh, only exclusive for people that believe that Christ is a savior, and they'll try to frame it in a certain way. And then sometimes they'll bring up these alt-right groups, for example, Richard Spencer and his group, which their name escapes me, and try to claim, oh, those people are anti-Semitic or whatever. Well, with all due respect, I think Richard Spencer, even if he does have some anti-Semitic leanings, his main focus isn't the Jews. It's actually usually blacks and other minorities, and then he'll lump in the Jews with them, which is also kind of not really to my liking, but they do have a massive blind spot, just so you know, to certain aspects of their own movements on the left. And that's what we're going to deal with today. A number of recent developments that just show that their moral indignation about the anti-Semitism, or what I call anti-Jewish rhetoric on the right, is more than dwarfed by such things happening in their own movements. So the cartoon you see below, or the graphic of this sheet of paper, it says "Ending White Privilege," and it was found at the University of Illinois at Chicago. This is coming from the foreword. I'll attach the link in the description. It says Jewish Americans up to 2% of the population make up 2% of the population. 44% of these Jewish Americans are in the top 1%. If there were 1,000 people in the United States, 10 of them would be in the top 1%. 20 of them would be Jewish, 9 of them would be Jewish and in the top 1%. Is the 1% straight white men, or is the 1% Jewish? So what this is really implying is that in reality, the people in the top 1%, they're not actually white people, they are actually Jews, because it's saying, well, the majority, or 44% of Jews, are in the top 1%. Therefore, 9 out of 10 of the top 1% will be Jews. This is mathematically not really possible. In fact, according to an analysis of this, they kind of flubbed the statistic. Just because 44% of Jews make over $100,000, that does not make them members of the top 1%. The top 1% is actually an income that's much higher than that. That's just for consistency. So from there, they try to make the case that it's actually the Jews who are pulling the strings behind white supremacy. I would have to say that that's kind of a ridiculous statement. There happen to be, I think, a disproportionate number of Jews who are in the liberal establishment that are quote-unquote fighting against the white supremacy. Although, in my opinion, they're fighting against, they're basically charging at windmills. There is nothing that they can accomplish now that hasn't already been accomplished through the legal system and changing laws and whatever. It's an invented problem. So let's move on to the next example. So this was shared by Michael Chikindas, the professor of food science at Rutgers. He also claims that his Facebook account was hacked, and that not all of the images that he's posted were actually by him, although we'll see if that ever becomes validated or not. I'll follow up on it. But the cartoon below, or the cartoon in this that's in this slide, says, "Mom, he just took our food money." And it says federal poverty programs, and next to it is next to these kids and their mom is this caricature of a Jew. Actually looks like a friend of mine from high school. And it says, be a patriotic goy. Somebody's got to pay $10 billion to Israel. Now, that's an ironic statement coming from the left. A lot of the times the left will actually defend foreign aid, not necessarily when it comes to Israel. I actually am not in favor of keeping the foreign aid arrangement with Israel. I think it's actually not a good relationship for both countries. I think the Israelis could probably develop their own arms industry even more than it is. They don't require foreign aid. I think it's propping up a lot of politicians over there that don't really need our aid to keep them afloat. And yeah, I think that there is a lobbyist problem here in America, and I don't think that makes me anti-Jewish or because I am Jewish, but it doesn't make me anti-Israel either. I think that they can serve their interests better by having a more independent foreign policy, to put it more simply. What this cartoon is claiming is that the $10 billion in aid that the Israelis get from the United States is taking money away from federal poverty programs. Now, these are some statistics that I found from federalsafetynet.com. I'll try to put it in the description later. But it says that the United States has dramatically increased federal spending fighting poverty over the last 50 years. Total welfare costs have risen from $422 per person in poverty in 1960 to $18,013 per person in 2016. That totals $72,050 for a family of four, even though the federal poverty threshold for such a family is $24,563. Total federal welfare costs include the expenditure of 13 large government programs, plus the Medicaid program, which supplies health care to low-income Americans. The figures have been adjusted for the cost of inflation stated in 2015 dollars. Even without healthcare, including healthcare costs and Medicaid, we spent $422 per person in poverty in 1960, which steadily increased to where in 2016 we spent $8,945 per person. That totals $35,779 for a family of four. Most of the federal programs were created over the past 50 years, and all of them expanded their scope and reach over this time frame. Yet despite the increase in spending, the poverty level has remained fairly constant at between 12 to 15% of the population. We have spent more and more money, but have not lessened the number of people in poverty. Why? The reason is because our system is poorly designed as described below. The U.S. welfare system is ineffective at reducing poverty by its very design. Individual programs were created over a 50-year period with little coordination and no master plan. So, without delving into all those statistics, we can see that there hasn't been money that's been taken away from federal poverty programs in order to fund the Israelis, as much as you would like to see that. As much as you would like to blame the Israelis for this increase in poverty, you can actually see that the United States has been spending more over time since the 1960s for federal poverty. So these people, they like to wave flags in the air about how the money is being misused. The more common thing is that they'll say, well, we have all this money to spend on foreign wars and on defense. Sure, I think that those things can be reduced as well, and also the federal poverty programs, because if you keep having programs that they're meant to fight poverty and yet it never decreases, then I'd say that that is just as much of a funding imbroglio as the massive military-industrial complex. Finally, there's a case that happened earlier this month. I believe it was October 13th, 2017. Joel Mayorga, a staff cartoonist for the Daily Californian, which is the school newspaper for the University of California, Berkeley, the flagship campus of the California system. He was caricatured here on the editorial page. You can see here it's captioned "The Liberal Case for Israel," which is actually the title of Dershowitz's discourse. And you can see him poking his head through a mock-up stage. And in his hand is an Israeli soldier murdering a Palestinian, and under his foot is crushed a Palestinian waving a flag. Okay, so what does this really mean? Well, this means a lot more for freedom of expression than it does for anti-Israel or anti-Jewish symbology. Now, do I think if you really looked at it independently that this cartoon would be anti-Semitic? I don't know if you can conclusively say that if you didn't take it in the context of everything else. However, when you have on the University of California, Berkeley, this attitude where they can call speakers that come in, such as Ben Shapiro and Milo Yiannopoulos and Gavin McInnes, they can call them neo-Nazis, even though they're not neo-Nazis. They don't believe in Nazism. They don't believe in anything of this sort. In fact, a couple of them are actually Jews, either by ethnicity or by religion. When you have that attitude on that campus, and then all this stuff about microaggressions and about cultural appropriation and about sensitivity to other cultures and pronouns and everything, and then you put a cartoon like that on your editorial page, why shouldn't somebody complain that it's anti-Semitic? When you go around and you try to police free speech all the time and as this cartoonist has already shown, and I can show you his own page. Here's one of his cartoons from March about gentrification, a common issue that the left typically protests against. Here's another one where undergraduate workers union, he's in support of that. He's criticizing the Trump administration over playing with the DREAM Act. That's on March 3rd. Here's another one asking for funding for the Fannie Lou Hamer Black Resource Center with the raised fist symbology. Then there's the matters of unlivable wages. I don't need a fancy machine to detect the dark matters affecting you. And here's another one depicting Donald Trump as a pig for threatening to defund University of California campuses because of, I believe that was during the Milo riots. So look, there is an issue here where I think that if all things being equal, this guy should have been able to publicize his cartoon if the UC Berkeley campus was not a hotbed for anti-free speech leaders who or activist groups that deny the podium and the platform for people they disagree with. So then when they come forward and they have somebody like Dershowitz come to their campus and lay out his vision, and I'm not aware whether there were protests or not that night, and then they publicize something like this, well, they have to fall on their own sword. If they have been spending all this time protesting against people who have views that they dislike, that they don't want to appear on campus, and then they turn around and publicize something like this, well, of course, free speech then, in my opinion, is something that they don't cherish and that they've already elucidated that's a policy that they're against. And in fact, once you have these policies in place on these college campuses where they do have free speech codes and they have these pronoun policies and whatever, then I think that Mayorga, the cartoonist, has lost his ability to stand on his own 2 feet and say, well, they're violating my free speech. They're violating the editorial independence of this magazine that we publish, this newspaper magazine. And in the end, I think that this is the epitome of what's wrong with the progressive left. This is a movement that in July, they started this ball rolling, especially with regards to the Jews with the Dyke March. This is a piece in the Tablet magazine, which is another Jewish magazine, talking about a journalist who exposed the Chicago Dyke March, details their anti-Semitic harassment over her reporting. Now, this was a woman, quote unquote woman, a transgender woman reporter for the Windy City Times, who went to the Dyke March and tried to document it, and she ended up, or he, whatever, seeing that these Jewish women were kicked out of the march for having a flag that had Jewish symbology on it, the Star of David. Now, the Star of David is identified with many people with the state of Israel, identified by many people with the state of Israel. And this woman was probably not trying to use it in that context. It's actually also a symbol of the Jewish religion. Now, let me ask you something. If the same flag had on it, let's say the symbol, a cross or something, would they have kicked her out of the march? I don't think so. It's possible because they hate Christianity. Now, if it had a crescent moon and a star as in Islam, would they have kicked her out of the march? No, probably not. These marches, they claim to be in support of pluralism and civil rights. They're not. What they're trying to do is to push in a new conflict based on the problem that they have already resolved all their previous conflicts. Is there a problem nowadays with gays getting married, which is why the Dyke March probably was, created in past time periods? No, they have full rights to get married in Illinois and throughout the United States, indeed, now. So that's not even an issue. Is there an issue with them having the ability to get hired or to sue institutions for not hiring them? No. The majority of these issues have already been resolved. So they need a new frontier in order to justify their own existence. Otherwise, they would either have to dissolve into a more pacifistic and less confrontational group, or they would have to dissolve entirely. These organizations, they need conflict in order to survive. Otherwise, they don't have a justification for their existence. These are tension groups. They're groups that survive on friction. And just like in UC Berkeley, just like in those other college campuses, if there is no injustice to protest, then they must invent one. And that's really what's going on. So those of you that are complaining about it being anti-Semitic or anti-Jewish, well, what you should really take stock with is the fact that this is what progressivism does. There will never be a period when they say, well, I think that all of the battles have been won and we should go home. They will always find something. In this case, it's the Jews. In other cases, it might be whites. In other cases, it might be Christians. In some cases, it might be Asians. And in some cases, believe me, they will find a reason to attack blacks because they need that tension, that confrontation, that conflict in order to justify their existence. So that's it for today. Please leave your comments, subscribe to my channel, share this with people that might think the same and might have some questions about it. Let me know if you think that Dershowitz actually has a point. I'm personally not a fan of his viewpoints on many issues, but I think that he certainly has the right to go to the campus and speak. And as always, have a great evening and see you tomorrow.